Hello, Ryan, and I'm a Cuddle Ambassador with Shannon Fabrics. And today on Sew Together Live, we're going to be making this adorable fluffy bunny stuffy from a pattern by McKay, Manor Musers. Before we start sewing, though, while everybody's joining, um, we just want to welcome you. And I wanted to let you know that we are at Shannon Fabrics are so excited because not last week, the week before last, we were in Chicago at the H&H America's trade show, and it was so incredible to meet so many of you at the trade show and then to introduce some new products that Shannon Fabrics offering. So one of the neat things that we got to share is a fabric called Quilting Cuddle. So it's a new fabric that has a very low pile. It's 1.5 millimeters thick. It sews, serges, embroiders, all of the things that you've loved doing with Cuddle and Lux Cuddle fabrics, but it comes on a 45-inch bolt. So your quilting and your sewing patterns that you may have had trouble translating to the 60 or larger widths of Cuddle and Lux Cuddle that we carry, you won't have any problem at all translating those patterns to the yardage requirements on the Quilting Cuddle. The other thing that's neat about Quilting Cuddle is that it comes in coordinated collections. So in the past, Shannon has released a couple of prints, some solids, and they all go together. And we have a lot of fun pulling colors together to make beautiful things, beautiful blankets, even garments, stuffies, other projects. But with these coordinated Quilting Cuddle collections, what we will have is a series of prints and solids that all work together, just like a regular line of quilting cottons does. And so this is really exciting for Shannon Fabrics because we've been able to put together as ambassadors some beautiful projects using a variety of prints that are all perfectly coordinated. So if you didn't get a chance to see the live stream on the Shannon Fabrics page, check out look for the live streams from yesterday. Julie and Annette showed all of the Quilting Cuddle collections that are going to be available as the first launch for these products. That'll be on the Shannon Fabrics Facebook page as well as on the YouTube channel. So I encourage you after this is over to make time to go watch those. I think you're going to be delighted by the Quilting Cuddle. And when you see it in person and get to work with it, you're just going to love it. So we had a great time. And if we got to see you and you're watching today, hello again. I had a lot of fun there, obviously, and could talk about that for a long time. But today we're going to do a fluffy, stuffy bunny. Now, Sheila McKay at McKay Manor Musers has created patterns specifically for another one of Shannon Fabrics' beautiful fabrics called Dreamy Fur. So Dreamy Fur is a very fluffy, high pile, which means it has a lot of fluff on it fabric. In fact, the fibers on it are 40 millimeters long. And so it has a lot of fluff, but unlike traditional faux furs, it's very soft and easy to care for. This is 100% polyester. So just like with the other Lux Cuddle fabrics, it's easy to wash, it's easy to take care of, and there's no special care things that you need to do. Unlike with an acrylic faux fur or something even that's a real fur, you really need to be careful with. This one, we can throw this in the washing machine, dry it on low or no heat, and shake it out and fluff it out, and then it's as good as new. So this little guy is super easy to sew, and I want to walk us through the steps so that we can make our own. What we're going to be using today is actually a fun project kit from Shannon Fabrics. This is a Dreamy Fur Fun Pack. So what a Dreamy Fur Fun Pack is, it's a pack, a bundle of a little bit of the Dreamy Fur fabric, which this one is rosewater, and then 5 coordinating cuts of C3 that are 9 by 12 inches. The neat thing about today is that we're going to have 3 winners for your own Dreamy Fun Fur Packs. So be sure to share this video wherever you're watching from. Share it to your socials so that your friends can join the Cuddle family. And be sure to join the I Love Cuddle Fabric Facebook group as well. Now, you'll get points for entering to win your own Dreamy Fur Fun Pack just by sharing it wherever you share it. But we would love to have you in the I Love Cuddle Fabric Facebook group as well. It's a great group where Shannon Fabrics cuddle enthusiasts are sharing their makes. They're sharing tips and tricks and all kinds of ideas for fun projects that you could make in that group. And we'd love to have you there. It's a really supportive community of lovely people. Anyway, this Dreamy Fun Fur Pack is a really great bundle because, especially for little projects like this fluffy stuffy bunny, or McKay Manor Musers also has the fluffy Stuffy, which is a little monster that's a similar shape without ears. He's got horns and an adorable little face as well. But you can use these coordinated cuts of the C3 in here that are perfectly coordinated with the Dreamy Fur. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this fluffy bunny. We're going to use the Rosewater Dreamy Fur Fun Pack, and then we're going to use 2 of these cuts in the project. So we're going to use the white for the middle of his ears, and we're going to use the Rosewater cut for the base of the Fluffy Stuffy. And let me show you a little bit about this Fluffy Stuffy. Here's one that I've already made, and this is such a cute project. Not only is he extra fluffy and fun, but there's several different ways that you can customize him. So for mine, I've customized them a little bit by taking my Rosewater Cuddle fabric, and I've done some machine embroidery quilting on the ears here. So they have some texture, so it's not just a plain um, piece of cuddle fabric, although there's nothing wrong with a plain piece of cuddle. It's gorgeous on its own. But quilting really elevates the cuddle fabric. And so I've just added that quilting texture to give the bunny just some cuteness in his ears, a little bit of different texture. Another thing that you could do is you could do machine embroidery on your piece of cuddle fabric and then fussy cut that piece out with a name or a date or whatever you're commemorating on the ears. You could add that there with machine embroidery. You could do some hand embroidery on it. You could add another print of cuddle fabric to the ears as well. There's just really no limit to what you can do to customize this fluffy bunny and make him your own. He's also super cute because he's got eyes and a nose buried in his fur. So he's kind of got a cousin it thing going. But with this fabric, it's super fun. And I know my kids have enjoyed, you know, patting him and giving him lots of love and then finding his eyes and making sure he's properly groomed and ready for camera. One thing that I've done on this one is I've kind of trimmed some of the Dreamy Fur away from the eyes, and I'll show you a little bit about that when we get to that step in the pattern. But you can also simply just brush it away. And I like to kind of swirl it away like this, just to kind of pat it and smooth it down a little bit so you can see his face a little bit better. What I've used are safety eyes. You don't have to use safety eyes. If you're giving this to like a small child that's under 2 years old, you'll want to either hand embroider the eyes on, or the pattern also walks you through how to cut some pieces of cuddle fabric and sew those on in the place where they need to be. So he's super cute. So let's get started. I'm going to take you to my cutting mat and first show you the supplies that we need, and we'll talk about how to cut him. Adriana is going to post a graphic for us that lists out all those supplies, and that way you can take a screenshot of that to make sure that you've got everything you need to make your own fluffy stuffy bunny. So Adriana, go ahead and pop that up and we'll go to the cutting mat. Okay, on the screen, you'll see the list of notions and supplies that we'll need for this. Besides the pattern, which I'll show you in a second, which is the McKay Manor Musers Fluffy Stuffy Bunny pattern, you'll also need some template plastic, a permanent felt tip marker, 40 weight polyester sewing thread for your top thread as well as your bobbin thread. You'll need a 9014 stretch needle installed in your sewing machine. And then to cut and take care of the fabric as we're getting it ready, an Olfa SAC one blade, which we love for cutting cuddle and Lex Cuddle fabric. You might want to use micro serrated scissors because it grabs the fabric really well. Safety eyes and noses, or black C3 cuddle fabric to make eyes and noses on it. And then a little bit, very tiny bit of hand sewing that we're going to do. And so your favorite hand sewing needle and thread for that, and then polyfill stuffing to stuff him. Some optional supplies you might be interested in using are poly pellets. Those are weighted stuffing beads. And some people like to put a little bit of those beads, not fill the whole thing up with beads, but just put a little bit in the bottom to kind of give the base of the fluffy puff some weight and heft. You might want 2 pipe cleaners or chenille stems to add to the ears to make the ears posable, and I'll be showing you how I attach those into my ears. And then another couple of tools that are not necessary but really handy to have is a pattern notcher. One of the things that you're going to learn is how to preserve the pattern on your printout so that you can use them over and over again with template plastic. And a pattern notcher is a sewist's tool or a pattern maker's tool to help make those notches in the pattern so that you can mark your fabric a lot easier. The other tool that I like using for something like this is the Easy Point and Turner tool, and we'll show you all of those in just a second. So let's go ahead and go to my mat so I can show you some of these tools here. So the first thing I've got is, of course, my pattern, and I've just printed it out. And I like to keep all my pattern pieces together, so I save these in the sheet protectors, and that way I can slip it into my uh, pattern notebook and keep track of them later. The other thing that I mentioned in the supply list is template plastic. Now, template plastic is available at your local crafts quilt store. And you can get it either with a grid on it or plain. And I've got some plain template plastic here. And what I've done is I've simply drawn my pattern pieces from the pattern onto the template plastic. And that way I don't have to cut out my papers from the pattern. When I'm printing out a pattern, generally what I'll do is I'll print on both sides to save paper, first of all. But that means that my pattern pieces are also printed on both sides. So if I cut them out on one side, I'm going to lose the ability to cut out on the other side. And so what I like to do is trace them on template plastic. And this is actually quite easy. So I've got my pattern right here, and I'll show you how I trace them on template plastic. I simply take my sheet of template plastic out of my package and I lay it over the pattern, and I simply draw along the lines of the pattern with a black or dark colored permanent felt tip marker. Okay, and I'm going pretty quickly here, but generally I go slow. Sometimes I use a ruler if I need help getting a nice straight line, or a curve ruler just to get the lines accurate. And then I make sure that I make all of my markings on my piece of plastic, and then I write what the pattern piece is. So this is the bunny's outer ear. So I would write that on my template plastic right here. I would write how many I need to cut. I need to cut 2 of those. And I've got this arrow so that I can see which direction the nap is supposed to be running when I get to the point of cutting out my fabric. So then I would simply cut that out with scissors. And once I have that cut out, I'll do that for all of the pattern pieces. And then I'll have my own plastic template that I can use over and over and over again. And you know how when you use a paper pattern, sometimes it gets a little messy and worn, but a template plastic pattern will stay nice and neat for a very long time. So I love using the template plastic to make a pattern. So it's a really great way to preserve your pattern and get a lifetime of use out of it. The other thing that I do when I'm making my pattern pieces is I'm going to mark things like places where I need to match up things. So this is the bunny body. You can see I've cut the circles out for the eyes, so I have a placement part. But then I've made a little notch in my pattern with those pattern notchers at the centers, because I'm going to need to match up parts of this bunny to the front and back. So we cut 2, a front and a back of this bunny, and I want to make sure I mark these centers at the top and bottom. And so this pattern notcher enables me to cut out just a tiny notch. Can you see that right there? Let's get it on something dark so you can kind of see the little notch that it made. There we go. Let's get it right in the right spot. And it just cuts out like a hole puncher right there at the edge of the pattern. And that way, when I'm drawing on my pattern, we'll go over here so where I can draw on this piece, because I have one ready to draw. When I'm tracing around my pattern piece onto my cuddle fabric, I've got notches made so that all I have to do is give it a little mark with my pen, and then I don't have to, um, if you're used to working with commercial patterns, sometimes they'll have like a arrow or two arrows or three arrows, and you've got to draw those arrows. It's hard to draw arrows with one of these larger felt tip markers. It's just not as precise. And so this tool, this pattern notcher tool, gives me a little bit more precision when I'm making those notched areas. And you can kind of see that I was able to get my notches on here very easily just by going right inside that little line that I cut with the notcher. Okay, so it's not a necessary tool. Like, you don't have to have one of those. I just find that it makes preserving your patterns really easy and very simple. So that is how that's how I use a pattern notcher. What we're going to need to do is we're going to need to take these pattern pieces and decide which fabrics we're going to use. So I just drew the bunny base on the rosewater fabric, and you might notice that on top of this fabric I have a little marking in the top here. And what I did is I wrote a little T, and then I drew an arrow with pointing down. That means that what I've already done is I've already determined the nap on the fabric. So you can kind of see as I brush the fabric down like this, I have a nice smooth piece of fabric. If I rub the fabric the other way, you can see it change color. It kind of does this tiger striping thing. It's the same effect that you would get, that you would feel if you were petting your cat backwards. They don't really like that, so I don't recommend it, but the sensation is very much the same. So the nap runs a certain direction on the cuddle fabric. And I want to make note of that because on the fluffy bunny, on his ears, I want them both going the same way. Sometimes if you get your naps mixed up and you have one going one way and one going the other, it's not that the color is different, but the way the light hits the fabric, it can make the color look different. So if we had one ear over here that was this shade and then one ear over here that was the nap going this way, it would appear that the ears are two different colors, and we don't want that effect. So I just want to make sure that my ears, or whatever part I'm cutting out of cuddle, is going all in the same direction. So now the base of the bunny, it doesn't really matter which direction the nap is going, but I wanted to just show you that, and it was very easy to show you that on this piece of fabric. So let's look at some of the other pieces that we'll need to trace on here. So this pattern has just a few pieces. They're very easy to use. So we've got the bunny body. This is the bunny body. We need two of these, and I've cut out some holes for the eyes, and I've made my pattern notches in the center of the top and the bottom. And I kind of gave myself a little guide to where the seam allowances needed to be. This pattern uses a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and so it's very easy to sew, which is nice because we're using a thicker dreamy fur. I've got my pattern pieces for the outer ear and the inner ear. And the outer ear, the nap is running up on the back of the ear. The inner ear is the front of the ear where I had that decorative stitching, and the nap on it is running down. Now these I'm going to cut out of two different fabrics. So the outer ear, I'm going to cut out of the rosewater dreamy fur. And then the inner ear, I'm going to cut out of the C3 cuddle fabric. So I've already got one inner ear drawn on my cuddle fabric right here. I've already checked my nap on the front, and I've written my T, drawn my arrow to make sure that I know the nap is going down. Let's put that back in. That was my headphones falling out. And then we need to draw another inner ear on the C3 fabric. And I'm just conserving fabric, and I'm drawing my ears pretty close. And the bottom I can put down next to the cut edge of the fabric. If your cut edge is not completely straight, you'll want to draw that line and make sure you have a nice straight edge so that it's easy to line that up, because we're going to have a little pleat that we need to make out of his ear. So I'm just carefully drawing around here. Now I'm using a black fine point permanent marker. Because my seam allowance is quite generous, I'm not going to really see the black ink inside, But if using black ink on white or light colored fabric bugs you, of course you can use a pastel colored marker. I needed this to show up on camera, and so I went ahead and used the black ink. Now I've got those pieces of the inner ears already drawn, and let me show you how I cut those out. There's a couple of ways that we can cut cuddle fabric out, and one of the ways is by using an Olfa blade. This is an SAC1 blade. It's got a 30-degree angle for the blade, and so it's really nice for cutting cuddle fabric because we can just cut the backing of the fabric and we don't cut those fibers. Now I am using a cutting mat, but really what I'm doing is I'm giving the fabric a little bit of tension by pulling on it with my opposite hands. Let's move it up so you can see that better. And I'm really just slicing through the backing of the fabric and trying really hard not to cut any of the fibers from the front side. Okay. So I'm just slicing, and the fabric just slices beautifully with this blade. If you find that your blade is not slicing well, these slip off really nicely. There's a tool at the end of the handle. You can just break off part of the knife, and there's more pieces to use to keep your blade fresh. So there's one of our ears. Another thing that you can use to cut your pieces out are micro serrated scissors. These are my Karen K. Buckley's. These are the very small ones since we're cutting small pieces. And with the micro serrated scissors, it's easier to cut cuddle fabric because they have a micro serrated edge, and they really bite the fabric nicely. Okay, so I'm just simply cutting through the fabric, and I'm not getting a whole lot of cuddle dust. A lot of people worry about getting cuddle dust when they're cutting with fabric, but because these have such a nice tiny pointy tip, I'm really just only cutting the backing, and I'm not cutting a lot of the fibers. This will be more evident when we get to cut the dreamy fur, but I wanted you to see how I did it with the cuddle fabric there. So there's my inner ears. I'm going to set them aside with their pattern template piece. I've already cut my one backing, or one of my bunny bodies. I'm going to need two, and then I've cut my two ears out. I'm going to set those right there. But I wanted to do the other one to show you how to cut the dreamy fur. I've got quite a good chunk of the dreamy fur right here, and I've already drawn my body on it. So let's set this down so that you can see it really well. So I've got my dreamy fur here face down. So the fluff is on this side. I already know which way my nap is going. And I've determined that already. And what I've done is I've taken my pattern template out of the plastic, and I've drawn around the same way I did on the C3 cuddle. Okay. The other thing that I did, because this one is going to be my front piece with the eyes, I made a cross inside each of the eyes so that I'll know where to put my safety eyes. You can make a marking for the nose as well, but I know I'm just going to put it slightly below the eyes, right between them. And so I'm not terribly worried about that. If I'm going to use the Olfa SAC1 blade, I'm going to get my blade ready, and I'm simply going to very gently give my non-dominant hand the opportunity to put a little bit of tension on the fabric. I'm keeping track of the fabric and holding it in place, but I'm being very careful with the blade, and I'm really only cutting the back. I'm not using the blade all the way down to the cutting mat. In fact, you can see here, if I lift it up, the blade is so sharp, it really cuts through the fabric so nicely. Now, because I know that I have a generous seam allowance to work with, I don't have to be super worried about getting this line perfectly straight, but I'm going to try to be as careful as I possibly can on camera, working working around these cameras while I'm trying to cut. But I'm just slicing the backing off, and it just slices so easily. I really am barely touching the fabric at all, and I'm certainly not going all the way down through the mat. Okay, so here's my backing cut of the dreamy fur. And let's set that piece of fabric aside. And now I have all of my pieces. So here are my outer ears. There's one of those, two of those. So the outer ears and inner ears make up the ears, and then I have a front and a back. So now the thing that I need to do is I need to go ahead and put my safety eyes in. And if you haven't ever worked with safety eyes, they're super fun to use because they give your Stuffy a lot of personality right off the bat. So one of the things that's fun about safety eyes is they come in so many different colors and lots of designs. So these are simply brown little safety eyes, and you can get these on Amazon. There are lots of sellers on Etsy that make custom safety eyes. These are simply a 10 millimeter safety eye. You can use whatever size you want. I have a box with lots of different sizes and lots of different colors, so I just picked out these brown ones. But let me show you how to add those. So for safety eyes, we want them to show up on the front, right? But I marked it on the back where they need to be. So in order to find my placement, I'm going to hold the safety eye with the stem, and on the back, I'm looking for that stem to be poking right on the middle of that X where I marked it um, with the template. And let's see if I can do this while I'm holding this in the air on camera so you can see. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take the tiniest little nip out of the fabric right where the tip of that safety eye is poking at, and I barely clipped any off. You can see that? That's all I cut off right there from the fabric. And now the prong of the safety eye just pops right in. Okay, the other part of the safety eye, the part that makes it safe, I suppose, or easy to apply, are these washers. And mine came with a separate bag full of washers. And so what we do with the washers is they're like a little cap, okay? And so they have a cupped area and then a domed area. That on the ground. And the what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take the cupped area and place it over the post and then push it down. If you have a problem doing that, if it's hard for your hands to do that, there is a pair of pliers that you can get to help you apply safety eyes. Crochet people use those safety eyes a lot in their little crochet creations, but that's as easy as it is to get those eyes in. Where'd my other eye go? I need another brown eye so I can put him. So he has two eyes. We can't have a bunny with just one eye. So let's get another brown eye out of my box. You can see how my box has all kinds of safety eyes in it, just lots of colors. And we've used a lot of them. So we're running low on brown eyes. We might need a refill there. So we have some brown eye babies. Okay, let's see. Let's take this safety eye. Oops, you know what? There's a reason that one was in there. That's not a good eye. Let's find a good eye. Here he is. Here's this eye right here. They do tend to roll away. So I'm glad that he hadn't made it to the floor because that would have been a hazard in the sewing room to worry about. And as you're a sewer like me, you already have things on the floor that you have to worry about. We don't want big safety eyes to worry about stepping on as well. Okay, so I'm taking that point, poking it into the middle of that marking that I made, and I'm going to use my Olfa blade, and I can just really just touch the back of the fabric to get a tiny little opening right there. I'm just really moving a couple of threads out of the way. It's not a whole lot, and my eye just pops in really easily right there. And then I can take my washer and I can put the cup down on him, and I simply push that down. And now my eye is secure. So here they are on the front. We got to move some of this fur out of his face. There you go. I like to blow it out just to see his eyes a little bit better. Do we want a nose for this little bunny? We can put a nose on him as well. Here's a nose. So in the box of safety eyes that I got, it came with some little triangle bits for a nose. And I can just put the nose right between the two eyes, kind of up high. I don't really have to make a marking for that, but if you wanted to make a marking, you totally could. And I'm just going to kind of line it up where I want it. And again, give the fabric where I'm going to put the safety nose just a little Just a little touch with the knife and it came right through. And then I'll put the cap on that piece as well. Okay, so now our nose is secure. Awesome, isn't he cute? So let's see, let's turn that nose so it's facing the right direction. Okay, now I think we're almost ready to sew. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna put our ears together and then we're gonna attach our ears to the bunny. After we get our ears done, we'll put the front and back of the bunny together, right sides together, and we'll sew around the edges of the bunny, and then we'll put the bottom on. After we're done with that part, we'll stuff the bunny. I wanted to show you though what your Dreamy Fur Fun Pack comes with is this adorable little Made with Love stick tag. It's a satin tag that has care instructions. So for whoever you're making it for, they'll know how to care for the fluffy bunny that you made for them. So these are really great. And we always want to remind people that the cuddle fabric, it's 100% polyester. It is machine washable, but it's not hard to take care of, even though we're not using a high heat dryer. We're just drying it on low or no heat to fluff it and then letting it air dry the rest of the way. Because it's polyester, it dries pretty quickly. So it's not hard at all. The other thing that the Dreamy Fur Fun Pack comes with is a Cuddle Basics sheet. And so it makes it so that in case you get your Dreamy Fur Fun Pack home from the store and then you don't remember all of the things that we've talked about here, all of the information and how to work with it is all inside the package. The other thing that's really nice about the Dreamy Fur Fun Packs is on the back of them, there's a QR code. And when you scan this QR code, it'll take you to the Shannon Fabrics Learning Center, where you'll see lots of other ideas for projects that you can make with your Dreamy Fur Fun Pack. So um, I hope that explains a little bit about the Dreamy Fur Fun Packs and why they're so great. Sometimes you don't need a whole yard of fabric. You just need a little bit to make something fun out of, like one of these fluffy bunnies. Okay, now I've got my pipe cleaners and we're going to put those in just a second, but let's see what else we need here. So here's my ears. We've got the bottom that we need to cut out. So let's go ahead and cut that out. And I'm going to cut that out real quickly just with my micro serrated scissors. And I'm carefully cutting along the lines that I made. And because I've marked the notches, I'm not cutting the notches. I'm not adding a little extra arrow or point out on those because they're marked. And that's going to help me quite well with matching up the places that need to be matched up on the pattern. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure if I marked the center front notches on the bottom of the bunny front and back. So I want to do that before we move to the sewing machine first. And on my sample, I had forgotten to put the tag in. And so I want to make sure that I show you how to add the tag as well. So I might go ahead and tape that on. So here's my base cut out. This is my front and back. Oh yes, I did make the notches. I did mark those on there. So I'm good there. Okay, one less thing to worry about. Okay, so I've got my base, my front and back set aside. I'll go ahead and put the tag on. That way I've got it. And I'm going to put the tag on the back. And we're just going to say the nap for this fabric. Well, we're not going to say it is. It's going from top to bottom right here. So I want to put my tag kind of in the back. So it'll say made with love. And since I'm not to that point in sewing yet, I'm going to go ahead and pin my tag on. And that'll help me remember that I'll need to sew it on when it's time for that section. Okay. All right. Let me move over to the sewing machine and we will see how to put this guy together. Okay. Hang on just a second. And just as a reminder, Adriana, if you don't mind, would you show the materials list again, just so that everybody can see what they might need if they want to make this project themselves. Again, the pattern pieces are all listed at the Shannon Fabrics blog so that you can see that there. And we have a link for that with those materials lists if you wanted to make a screenshot or if you wanted to refer to it later, just to bookmark it. We have all of that information out for you. Okay, let's see. We're going to go over here to the sewing machine. And here are my pieces that I can move out of the way. And now I want you to be able to see under my needle as we sew this project along. Okay, we've got a couple of our scraps. Now I've got these cuddle scraps from cutting out my bunny, but I'm going to save those because I have plenty of room on the bunny pieces of the cuddle cuts that were in this project. So I can save those and probably get some more bunnies out of each of the white and rosewater pieces that I used. Okay, the pattern instructions say that when we're making the ears, we can insert a chenille stem or a pipe cleaner so that we can pose our ears. You can make them bendable. I'm going to go ahead and add my pipe cleaners to the seam allowance of the ears. This is not in the pattern, but I like to do it because I don't want to have to worry too much about where this pipe cleaner might be. And so I'm going to zigzag the pipe cleaner piece on to the seam allowance area of the outer ear. And so I have a zigzag set up on my sewing machine. I'm actually going to make it a little bit wider, and a very long stitch. So my length of my zigzag is actually 5 millimeters, and the width of my zigzag is 5 millimeters as well. So it's a nice wide zigzag. And that way my needle is going to go back and forth over the pipe cleaner, not through it. And I can make sure that I get that zigzag. So kind of what I'm doing is couching the zigzag, the pipe cleaner on underneath that zigzag. So let's get that set to 5. And I'm using my hand wheel to double check that the needle is going to go across one side and then the other without hitting that pipe cleaner. I try really hard not to run over metal, like pins, and I don't often sew with pipe cleaners, but in this case, I'm treating it like a pin because it's a wire and it's flexible, but I don't want to hit it with my needle. So I'm going to go slow and just get him attached. And then I don't have to worry so much about fiddling with it later. So I'm just going along the edge of the ear, catching that on. So this is basically couching it to the inside of the ear. And that way my ear will be bendable. So again, go slow. I've got thread that matches the same weight in the top and the bobbin. So I'm just using 40 weight sewing thread that's polyester. I'm using polyester thread because I'm sewing a polyester fabric. And then I've got a 9014 stretch needle in, and I've got, I picked the kind of pipe cleaner that's metallic. And so it is likely to get tangled up with that fur quite a bit. Okay, there's one on. And that pipe cleaner comes out a little bit short, and that's okay, but you can see how the pipe cleaner is couched onto the edge there. And that just gives this edge some stability, and then I'll be able to adjust it. The other thing that I'm going to do now is take the front of my ear, or the inner part of the ear. I've got an inner and an outer, and I'm going to match up these edges and then pin them together. Now, when we're pinning cuddle fabric projects, we're usually doing a technique called double pinning because we want to make sure that we can keep the fabric together and make sure that it behaves for us. This is such a small project, though. I'm not necessarily going to be doing the double pinning, but I am using quite a few pins to keep everything in place for me. We, as the sewist, the one who's operating the sewing machine, you're in charge of your project. You're in charge of your fabric, and you are the boss of it. And so the way we control it is by pinning, pinning, and then pinning some more. And that way we can tell the fabric that we're the ones in charge. And so I'm just putting pins all along the edge. Even though it looks like that might be overkill if I was doing a regular sewing project, it's just right for sewing with cuddle. With sewing with the dreamy fur, we've got extra fluff to deal with. And so what I'm doing is simply tucking it in to the gap between the two layers of fabric. And I'm thinking about the backing of the fabric where I've couched that pipe cleaner on, where I made all my marks. And I'm just tucking the fibers down into that area between the two pieces of fabric. So those fibers, I'll have maximum fluffiness after I get done sewing. I don't want a lot of these fibers on the inside of the fabric because I mean on the inside of the project because there's no fun in that. The fun is when the bunny is fluffy, not when his fibers are all caught inside. So I'm just going to add as many pins as I feel like I need to hold that together really well. And now I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance around this bunny, and I'm going to give it a straight stitch, and then just like with other cuddle projects, I'm going to use a 3.5 millimeter long stitch. Since my presser foot is down and my thing's ready to sew, I can go ahead and take out that pin. And you can see that I'm sewing with a thread that is a contrasting color. You're going to want to match your threads on your project. I'm just using it's actually a denim blue because that's what I was using the last thing that I was sewing in here. And I am going slow around these curves. Sometimes you might need to take one stitch at a time. And then you can see how my stitches are about a 1/2 inch away. On my machine, 1/2 inch is right at the end of my presser foot with this presser foot on. So find out where your 1/2 inch mark is and sew that seam. I'm going to check and see if we have questions. Let's see. Oh, okay. I can see people on here. Great. Thank you. I'm so glad that y'all are here. And Ajir is in our comments in Facebook and YouTube. So Ajir is one of our Cuddle ambassadors. You've probably seen her on some recent Sew Together lives and on some of the Shannon Fabrics project videos. And so as you have questions, feel free to ask questions in the comments and Ajir can answer them quite capably. And then if there's something specific that I need to see, Ajir, if you'll make sure that I know, maybe texting me would be great right here. Let's see. Oh, I see lots of people on here. This is awesome. I'm so glad. And don't forget to share this live video. So we love sharing Cuddle fabric and we love sharing it with people that love Cuddle fabric. So share the video so that you can be entered for a chance to win as well. Okay, here's my other pipe cleaner and my other outer ear. And on this one, I didn't check the length of my pipe cleaners. I should have done that before. But I'm going to start this one so that I have more at the bottom on each side and it'll be fine. But I'm going to give this one a zigzag around the edge. Let's go back to my zigzag setting. Again, I want a long zigzag stitch. So I'm going to put it at 5 millimeters. My width is going to be at 5 millimeters. And then I'm simply going to zigzag that pipe cleaner on just at the edge. It's in the seam allowance, so I'm not really worried about sewing it through the pipe cleaner when I'm applying my other piece of fabric to it. So, and actually, this is going to be nice too, because it's a little bit shorter. I'm really not even going to have to worry about catching it, the metal parts in the seam when I sew the ears to the body too. So that's actually kind of serendipitous. All right, so we've got the pipe cleaner couched on, and now we don't have to worry about inserting it. I also, the other reason I like to sew it on and sew it down is I don't want it wiggling around in there. Sometimes the edges of the pipe cleaners can be a little bit sharp. If you need to, you could take, something and just kind of roll it in on itself and fold it over so you don't have a sharp edge poking anywhere. But especially if you're giving this to a child, I don't want pipe cleaners just loose and around. Kids put everything in their mouth, and kids, animals, grown-ups. And I don't want anybody getting poked with a pipe cleaner. Okay, so having it sewed in means it's not going to wiggle out or wiggle around in there. Okay, now I've got that ear pipe cleanered. There's got to be a technical term for that. Stabilized. And I'm going to pin this inner ear on, just like I did the first one. And again, I'm tucking any fibers that want to escape. I'm tucking them in between the front and the back. I do love working with the Dreamy Fur quite a bit. But just this step of tucking in the fibers is probably the hardest part of this whole project. And it's not hard. It's just that there are fibers that we have to deal with. So we just deal with them and smooth them around. And cuddle has such a nice feel to it that really these little things of tucking in and like checking for the nap and petting them, they're all sensory opportunities that if you need that extra softness and that extra sensory um, experience, cuddle is a great fabric to work with for that because it's just so soft and wonderful. And for those of us that need that sensory thing, we can't get enough of it. Okay, now that my ear is attached with pins, I'm going to go ahead and put a straight stitch back on. Again, I'm going at 3.5 millimeters for the length of my stitch. And then I'm going to sew the inner ear to the outer ear. Now, one thing that you may have noticed is that I'm not using a walking foot. And when I'm sewing stuffies with cuddle fabric, I generally do not have a walking foot on, especially with small pieces like this. So we do like to recommend that you use a walking foot when you're sewing with cuddle fabric, especially the Lex cuddles, because it helps the top layer and the bottom layer feed evenly underneath the machine. But when I'm working with something this small like this, and I've got it pinned really well, I don't need necessarily the control of a walking foot. And that walking foot on mine is kind of bulky. Some of the newer machines have a walking foot or a dual feed system that is not so bulky, but on mine it is. But anyway, so that's why I don't have the walking foot on because I don't really need it for this project. And your mileage may vary. If it comes out wonky, try it with a walking foot on. Okay. Now I've got a tool. This was recommended on your supply list. This is an easy point and turner. And it is a turning tool that's kind of like, I don't really have any other way to describe this. It's like forceps. So it's grabby and it has a little hollowed out part with a point on the other end. And when you open it up with your hands like scissors, it opens up that gap between those two. I like to use this tool because during the pandemic, when we were making masks, a lot of us really hurt our hands by doing so much rotary cutting and sewing and cutting and sewing. And so a tool like this that I can insert into something that I need to turn right side out makes the whole process for turning a whole lot easier so that I'm not struggling to turn something right side out. You might want to use a loop turner or you've got some tube turners or tubies or things like that. I like this easy point and turner. It is my favorite tool and it really just helps me get in there, turn the piece without a lot of struggle. Now I've got my ear turned right side out and some of those fibers are still caught in the seam allowance, even though I tucked them in really good. And I'm going to use my fingernails to fluff those out. We can spend lots of time doing this. If you have a stiletto, the By stiletto is great for fluffing those out. I keep my nails a little bit long, and so again, I enjoy the sensory experience of fluffing them out with my fingers. Um, and so you can use whatever tool you'd like to use for that. So here's my other one, and I'll demonstrate using the easy point and turner again. I simply put one end of it into the ear, and then I close the handle and the little point part kind of gets tucked into the hollowed out area inside and I can simply pull the ear over the other side of the turner and in just a second it's done. Okay, so nice and easy. Again, you can use the inside of the loop to help smooth around your seam edges because he's so fluffy. you know, you can go crazy flipping those out, but I think he looks great. I have a nice ear. Not as much stuffing or not as much as the fluff got caught in that seam allowance, so I'm not really going to worry about it, but I'm going to set those ears aside. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to sew the front and back of the um, fluffy stuffy together. And we're going to put the eyes, I mean, not the eyes, we're going to put the ears on first so that they are caught into the seam between the front and back of the fluffy stuffy. So The pattern says that you can make a little pleat across the bottom of each ear if you would like to, and that would do like this. You would simply baste around it and then attach it to your ear. I'm not going to add a pleat to these because with the dreamy fur and with the fluff, and then I put the pipe cleaner in already, I feel like I've got a lot going on and I'm not going to worry about a pleat. I've done some with the pleats before, and like the one I showed you before, it has the pleat and it looks great. But I'm not going to do it on this one. I am, though, going to baste it closed so that when I put it in, I'm going to catch both layers of the ear and not miss out on the front or back of the ear, because that is something that can happen. This is one of those, I've tried it and this is what happened. So I just closed my ear up with a little bit of stitching. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for the other ear. And that way, those two pieces are more of one piece instead of two different pieces. And again, I'm sewing this well within the seam allowance. So I've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that's probably 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And you can see that stitching because I use the contrasting thread there. Okay, let's go ahead and match up the ears on top of the fluffy, stuffy bunny face. And again, I'm going to move his fur back over his face. So these are his bangs. I'm going to brush his bangs down because I want to be able to see the backing of the fabric. And I'm going to just pick where I want my ears to be. I want them to actually be pretty close to the top of the bunny. And there is a lot of fluff here. It is challenging to see under all this fluff what I'm doing, but I'm trying to do this the best I can for you. So here is the ear, here's the top of the bunny, and here's the notch that I made. Okay, that notch is going to help me on the wrong side of the bunny so that I can really see what I'm doing and make sure that that ear is on the right side of the notch. Okay, because I don't want an ear on top in the middle and then one off to the side. I want it on either side of the center. And so I'm going to give this little area some pins, matching up as best I can see those two cut edges of the fabric so that bottom of the ear and the top of the bunny's head. And I've got one ear pinned down. There's some more fluff. I'm going to brush this fluff down. And on the other side of that notch, I'm going to put my ear face down on that side. And that is a lot of fluff, again, to try to see through and work around. But I'm going to get it as close to the notch as I can. And then again, patting that dreamy, fun fur all down into the seam or back to the body of the bunny. And then I'm going to double check from the other side that his ears are in a good spot. Okay, so this is what it looks like all pinned together, 2 ears pinned on. And then from the other side, there's the eyes. And then here's the ears as evenly as we can get pinned on either side of the notch. And I'm going to go ahead and baste that down. So there's a little bit of basting here, but because we're working with the fur, and sometimes it feels like we're sewing blind, I think it's just a good idea to give ourselves the best opportunity that we can have for sewing. And so I'm just going to baste it. Again, I'm inside the seam allowance and I'm following the edge of the fabric, not a full 1/2 an inch away. So our seam is going to be in 1/2 an inch, but I'm close to the edge, making sure that I'm catching all of those layers as best I can. And then again, petting the fur and getting it out of the way. And I do have a piece of pipe cleaner right there, so I'm going to make sure that I'm jumping over that with my needle and not going through it. So I'm going to go slow right there. Okay, made it over. It's almost like driving over a pothole or a speed bump, okay? You don't really want to take those at full speed. You want to be careful. And I'm coming up to my last pin here. I have fluff and I can tell that my edges are down here and I have some fluff out here, but I want to make sure that I catch the backing. And when I finish that basting, I'm going to double check that I did catch the backing. Okay, so the backing is caught, the ears are caught, and when they're secured on, this is what they'll look like. But we're going to put the back of the bunny onto the front of the bunny, and we're going to simply, this is where those notches come in really handy. I'm going to start with the one that I made at the top middle on the front and the back and match those notches up together. Okay, and I'm going to put a pin in it. Then I'm going to go around to the side bottom where I have this corner on the front and the back, and I'm going to match these corners together. And I'm going to put a pin there. On the other side, I have another corner. Whoops, an ear came out. We want those ears to stay inside. But I'm going to match the other corner up. And I'm going to be tucking these fibers in, but right now I'm just trying to get all of the pieces of fabric together first. And I'm going to put a pin right there. Now this notch in the middle on the bottom across the straight edge of the front and the back, I'm not pinning this together because I've got a circle that we're going to pin on for the base. So I'm going to go back to the top and then start pushing the fibers down in between my front and back pieces. And as I get the fibers pushed down in between there, see how that's nice and clean? When I get it clean, I'm going to put a pin in it. I've got them all tucked up. I'll put another pin. This is where the ear is. So that ear part wants to fold up under. So actually, I should be pinning from this side because there's more bulk over here and it's going to want to fold under. So I need to pay more attention to that side because the fiddlier piece needs more of my attention so that I want it to be on top. Okay, the other piece is flatter. It doesn't have any eyes in it. It doesn't have the ears attached to it. So it will behave a little bit better. So I can put that one on the bottom. And I'm just going to pin all the way around here, tucking that fiber in. Just getting as much of the fiber inside between the layers as I can. And like I said, this is one of those projects where it doesn't seem like you're doing a whole lot of sewing and you're really not, but we spend a lot of time with our hands on the project in the same way that when you're quilting, you're spending a lot of time at the ironing board and the cutting table, not necessarily at the sewing machine. So yes, it is a sewing project, but we're spending a lot of time doing things besides just using a sewing machine. So I'm always amused by that. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side where my other ear is, and then tuck my fibers in. Just tuck, tuck, tuck. See how they go in nicely? They will be obedient. They're quite compliant. And this is another reason too why I love working with the dreamy fur rather than standard faux furs or acrylic type furs, is this, it does behave so well. It's a joy to work with and not a struggle. Okay, so now that I've got it pinned, I'm simply going to take a 1/2 inch seam allowance and stitch with my same straight stitch all around the curved part of the front and back of the bunny. And this does not take very long at all. There is not a whole lot of sewing in this project for sure. We've done the hardest part by doing the ears. That was the smallest part. I like to take care of the smaller bits before I have to do larger bits. And that way I'm going from most fiddly to least fiddly. Okay, this is part here where that ear is. And so I'm just going to go slow, making sure that I stitch over that basting line and that the basting part was in the seam allowance. And so I'm not missing those ears. I definitely want the ears to be caught. I don't want to have an ear situation later where I have to go back and hand stitch ears inside of the dreamy fur. And then as you can see how the sewing machine kind of pushes the fabric a little bit, because I have it pinned so well, I have the opportunity to correct any of those little bubbles before I've gotten to the end. If I didn't have it pinned and the sewing machine presser foot was pushing that fabric out, when I get to the end, I would have one piece longer than the other. So using a lot of pins is actually a really nice way to safeguard against having a situation where your fronts and backs don't match. So even if you have a little bubble there, you won't notice it at all. Okay, our fluffy bunny is sewed together from the front and the back, and I could flip it out and show you, but we're gonna have to flip him back in. So here he is. Can we get far enough away with the camera? Let's see. So you can see his little face. We'll need to give him a little haircut to see his eyes. Here's his ears. It's hard to see him, isn't it? Let's get back just a little bit. There we go. We can see his eyes. We can see him a little bit under all of his fur. Okay, here's his ears. All right. So I'm going to turn him back wrong side out. Okay, these are some of the fibers that were caught in the seam allowance, and it's okay. I'm not going to worry about them now because there's plenty of fibers on the other side, as you saw. And now I need to put the base of the fluffy, stuffy bunny on. And remember, I put the label on at the back. So I know that this notch is going to be my back notch. So here's the back of my bunny, and I'm going to match that back center notch to the back center notch of the bunny and put a pin in it. And again, I'm just pinning perpendicularly right now, and I'll go back and I will pin parallel to the seam or to the cut edge of the fabric in a minute. But to get these initial pins in there in the right place, I'm just pinning perpendicularly. The next notch is going to be matching up to the seam allowance along the side. So I'm going to put a pin in there. Here's the other center notch of the front. So functionally, what we did is we divided the base into quarters so that as we're sewing a circle onto a flat piece, which is the front and back, we're turning it into a 3D shape. Okay, so this circle is going to give the whole thing his shape. Now, the other thing that we need to know is we need to leave an opening. So I'm going to make a mark on my stuffy on the bottom. And I know this is the back side because my label's over here. And I'm going to put about 2 inches, as much as I can, to think about turning him right side out, getting those ears out. But I'm going to make a bracket when I start sewing around him so that as I'm pulling it right side out, I don't pull my stitches and then need to hand sew more. So making an L bracket is a really great way to finish off these openings when you have a place to turn. So I encourage you to do that on any pattern, whether it's marked or not, because it just makes it so much easier to handle. And I'm going to go ahead and start my parallel pinning. So because I have a circle onto a flat piece, I love geometry. And so I love to think about how this actually happens. The circle is going to get precedence. So I'm going to sew with the circle on top because that is the area that needs the most attention. Okay, so I know this piece of fabric has more fur and fluff on it, but for the purposes of sewing this seam, I want the circle on the bottom to end up a circle. And if I'm sewing from this side, I may or may not get a circle, but I want to get a circle. And so I'm going to sew with this circle bottom up on top. And again, I'm poking those fibers down just so they're out of my way when I'm sewing. This is the side seam right here. I'm going to put that perpendicular pin back and put a parallel pin in there just to hold it really well. And then there's my tag. I do want to make sure I catch that so my tag edge is right on the edge of the base fabric. And then I'm going to give that a really good pinning as well, parallel. And it seems like this round piece is not going to fit into the circular piece. I mean, the round piece is not going to fit into the flat piece, but it will. So we're letting the circle be the circle. And so the way we do that is we let the circle have precedence. So now we have a round piece pinned into what was a flat two-dimensional shape. Okay, so this is going to give the whole thing kind of that dome structure by having a round piece at the bottom. And I don't want to forget that I need to leave a gap there. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start at one side of the gap. I'm using the same 3.5 inch oh, not 3.5 millimeter stitch length. And I'm going to go in at my bracket up to a half of an inch. Let's turn that a little bit better so you can see more what I'm doing. And then lift my presser foot, and then I'll start sewing around the circle. So my sewing machine is stopped with the needle down. If you can set your sewing machine to always have the needle down when you're sewing a project where you need to make these tight turns like this, that's really helpful to do. So because it stayed with the needle down, it will let me just have a continuous line of sewing. So when I raised my presser foot, it didn't get away from me. Okay. And now I'm going to just start sewing around a half of an inch away from the edge, all the way around that circle. And again, I am going pretty slow, not going full speed ahead. If your machine is adjustable and you can adjust your speed, and you're not adept at doing that with the presser foot, with your foot or the foot pedal, you can set your machine to go a little bit slower. That way you don't have to worry about, stepping on the gas and it going too fast. But when you get comfortable, you'll learn to control the speed with your foot or with your, if you have another way to control the needle on your machine. My mom had one where she could control it with her knee. She had lost use of her feet, so that was kind of nifty. And so she had learned to control the speed of her machine with her leg. And I thought that was pretty clever. So we adapt to whatever we need so that we can do the thing that we want to do. Okay, here I'm coming around to that leg and my pin came out. So I'm going to double check. I'm actually going to back up a little bit and repin this area because my pin came out as it was going around and I want that tag to be on there. I don't want to forget about it like I did last time. So I'm going to repin this curve right here. I have a pin right here, but it's not curving nicely. So while I have the opportunity to redo it, I'm going to redo it. Repin that there, repin my notch, and it looks like I think I'm good to keep going all the way around. So I'm going to start, let's see, I lost my tag. Oh, there's my tag right there. Okay, I'm going to start right there where I stopped. I'm going to back stitch a little bit, and I'm sewing around the edge of that circular piece. And so take your time and go slow. That way, this is a nice seam. The other thing, too, about sewing with Cuddle is that because we have so much fluff and fiber, if you have a little bubble here and there, you're not really going to be able to see it from the other side. So don't get too wound up if it's not 100% perfect the first time you do a project. Okay, I'm going to make that little L bracket again into my seam allowance and then out the side of the fabric. And now the bottom is sewn on. Here's the pin that I was using to keep that together. And now I have a round bottom on the fluffy Stuffy. And I'm going to reach into my opening here. And because I did that L bracket, my seam isn't going to pop right there. So I really love using that L bracket technique. And I'm just going to reach in and push him out through that opening. And we're almost ready to say hello to our little friend. Okay, let's see. I'm looking back through here. Oops. Um, let's see. Oh, yeah. So thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Adriana, for mentioning that. This pattern is found at the McKay Manor Musers website. So this is, it's not Shannon Fabrics pattern, but she works with Shannon fabrics a lot and is quite aware of all of the fun things that you can do with it. So she created this pattern to use with the Dreamy Fur specifically. I do love that. Okay, so here's our ears. Let's back up just a little bit. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to the front camera and y'all don't laugh, but I got to use a lint roller real quick because I was cutting with abandon. Okay, so let's go back to a different camera. and I can show you better what I'm doing. Okay, here we are. Here's our bunny. He's turned right side out. You can see with the pipe cleaners in his ears, I can bend them a little bit and it'll hold their shape. So when I get some stuffing in here, um, then we'll trim around his eyes so you can see him a little bit better. But I've got a bag of polyfill stuffing. I like the ultra plush. You can get the silky or just the standard polyfill. And I'm simply going to grab some little bits of it and not too much at one time. When you're making a stuffy, you don't really want to grab big handfuls. You want to put little bits in at a time, and that way it's not clumpy and or weird feeling. Um, I can always tell when somebody's just stuffed a whole bunch in when you're. Sometimes my kids and I are helping me, and I have to tell them take small handfuls and put small handfuls in, not great big handfuls. We're not putting the whole bag in at once because we want him to be nice and huggable. We don't want him to feel weird. So I'm just putting little bits in, and then one of the things that I do want to show you is how I like to hand sew my stuffies closed because sewing, hand sewing on cuddle can be a little bit of a challenge. So I have a little trick that I wanted to show you. And again, I'm putting stuffing in here and I can kind of feel that it's getting full up at the top. Okay. Where are your eyes, man? You need a haircut really bad. So here's his eyes, here's his ears. He's getting full, and I'm pushing the stuffing down into the top, and I've got a little bit to go, not much more. And at this point, if you wanted it to have a weighted bottom, you could use a funnel or a some sort. You could use a spoon to put some of the weighted pellets in there. The plastic pellets from Polyfill are they're safe, for lack of a better word. They're not made out of weird stuff. There's all kinds of weighted things that you can put in there, but in the past we might have used corn or beans, and we're not doing that anymore because we don't want bugs in the house and in the stuffies. So we're going to use an artificial ingredient to keep that nice and warm. So I'm going to shape this with my hands to get that bottom flat. So I can put my polyfill away. But now, where are your eyes? Their eyes. There's his eyes right there. His nose is buried way too far down there. Let me show you how I give him a little haircut around his eyes. So see that fluff right in between his eyes? I'm going to pretend that I'm a puppy dog groomer, and I'm just going to snip that fluff between his eyes away. Okay. So you don't have to do it that close. You can be a little bit more precise, but you might even want to snip just a little bit of those fibers away from the outside edges of the eyes. I just created a little problem for myself. Y'all can't see that flying around. I hope. It's okay. Anyway, now I can see his eyes a little bit better. So we've got his nice flat bottom. We've got his fluffy ears that I can pose in little pieces. Um, I've got fluff flying around. Anyway, I didn't want to have that happen. And now what we need to do is we need to sew up the bottom. So I'm going to thread a needle without readers on. So that will be a experience. And I've just got some more 40 weight sewing thread. And I'm going to cut off a length. You actually can use a stronger thread, so maybe a 30 weight, or even upholstery thread is sometimes what I like to use for sewing up stuffies. This is more of a sitting on the shelf kind of stuffy. It's not necessarily a playing with stuffy. If it's a playing with stuffy, if it's a playing with stuffy, then I'll often use a upholstery thread that's a little bit thicker, maybe it's waxed. And I find that it doesn't come apart as easily. So it's a little bit stronger thread. And even though my stitches are nice and strong, um, if I'm using a 40 weight thread, they're not quite as strong as the sewing machine stitches. And, if you have kids, we've all had the thing where we've had to re-sew up the area. Trying to see the eye of the needle. And my glasses are on the other side of the room, so that's not really good planning on my part. Here we go. We've got it through. We made it. Okay. So I've got a doubled thread. and I'm going to tie a knot on my two ends. Okay, so I've got a good knot on the end, but because Cuddle's a knit fabric, just my knot, if I go straight through the fabric, my knot may not catch onto the fabric. So I want my knot to really catch. So what I'm going to do when I start my stitch, instead of pulling my needle all the way through and my thread all the way through, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go back through that loop. Here's my end of the thread. And I'm going to go back through where I made that knot. So I'm catching the knot with the needle. And now my knot, it's kind of a messy knot right there, but my knot's not going to come out. My knot is not going to come out. So lots of words. I don't want to pull and have that knot come out while I'm trying to sew this closed. And then I'm simply going to take a ladder stitch. And again, this is not easy to see because we're working with the dreamy fur, but a ladder stitch is simply going down through one side of your seam allowance, straight across, and then down the other side. And so I'm doing that about 1/4 of an inch away for each straight part down here. If it was a playing with stuffed animal, I might do them a little bit closer, but again, like I said, this is a sitting on the shelf stuffed animal. Um, of course, there's no reason why you couldn't have these as playing with stuffed animals. That would be totally fine. But I'm going to just kind of go back and forth. And as I go across, that ladder stitch gets hidden in the fibers, and it's a really nice, clean finish. With so much fiber, though, you don't have to do a ladder stitch. You could just do a whip stitch, but I like a ladder stitch, so that's what I'm doing. And I'm almost done. It doesn't take a whole lot of stitches. We only had a 2-inch opening. And again, when I finish my stitches, I'm right there at the end, and I can ease any, any part that's a little bit loose, I can ease that in and it'll be just fine. The cuddle is nice and forgiving, so I'm not worried about, seeing that. But I'm going to take my little loop and I'm going to go through it a couple of times to make a nice strong knot at the end. And now I'm going to snip my thread. And again, I used hot pink thread on a light pink fabric, but because we've got so much fluff here, it's not a big deal and you won't see it at all. And now I've got my tag at the bottom. So whoever I give this to knows how to take care of it. One class that I was doing recently, we all put tags in, and one lady told me that her person that she gave it to her didn't believe that she made it because it had a tag in it. And we're like, no, that's just a care tag. Doesn't mean that was made in a factory. So here is my fluffy bunny. He could have a little bit more haircut around his eyes. I got a little bit of fluffy bunny on my face. But he's all done and he's perfect. And I'm so pleased with how he came out. And I'm really happy with him. Let me check and double check that we have any other questions. Pin, pin, pin. Oh, yeah, go ahead and make sure that you've shared. If you haven't shared yet, share now so that you can be entered to win your own Dreamy Fur Fun Pack. So we've got 3 of those to give away. And Adriana, if you would put those names up on the screen or go ahead and draw for those. Be sure to check out the Shannon Fabrics blog post about this project so that you'll have all of the information you'll need to know, as well as the link to go get the pattern so that you can make some of these fluffy bunny stuffies yourself. And check out her other stuffy projects. They're really darling. And she has so many patterns that work really well with Cuddle, with Lex Cuddle, with the Dreamy Fur. She's really a great pattern designer. So let's see. Let's see who our winners are here. Fuzzy ball of cuteness. Yeah, it is. Okay, let's see. Okay, our giveaway winners today are, whoops, let's see. I want to be able to see, I read them. Maria McKay, Katie Shell, and Stephanie Palmer. That's so fun. So be sure to email info@shannonfabrics.com with your name, shipping information, as well as your phone number. And in the subject line of the email to info@shannonfabrics.com, be sure you write live winners so that the people back at the office know that's what you're emailing them about. So thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I've had a great time sewing a fluffy, stuffy bunny and have more to make. So join the I Love Cuddle Facebook group. And when you make your fluffy, stuffy bunnies, be sure to share them in there. It would be so fun to see an army of fluffy, stuffy bunnies and all the things that you make with your dreamy fur on there as well. So anyway, thanks for spending time with us today. And we hope that as your school year winds down and your summer cranks up, that you have find lots of fun projects that you can make with Shannon Fabrics and with your dreamy fur fun packs. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Happy sewing.